The desert of Burkina Faso has always been described as a land of silence, a place where sand, heat, and endless winds separate villages from one another for days. For decades, families living in the northern Sahel region have endured isolation so severe that a sick child could not reach a hospital in time, and a farmer could not sell his crops beyond his dusty hometown. Yet recently, President Ibrahim Traoré announced what he calls the Desert Highway Project, a bold plan to build a 420 kilometers road cutting through the barren lands of Burkina Faso. With an investment of nearly $280 million US, this project aims to connect the capital Ouagadougou with the forgotten communities of the Sahel, promising hope where despair has ruled for generations. Traoré told his people that this road is not only about asphalt and concrete, but about dignity, security, and survival. It is a story about young workers who will earn wages for the first time, about traders who dream of reaching markets, and about mothers who will no longer fear losing their children on the journey to medical care. Still, behind the inspiring speeches lies the haunting question that we must all consider. Is this highway a road to prosperity? Or is it a gamble too costly for a fragile nation like Burkina Faso? And why does President Traoré believe that this desert road, more than any other reform, could redefine his entire legacy? When President Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward to officially announce the Desert Highway Project, the capital Ouagadougou was filled with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. Because for many citizens, the idea of carving a modern road across the scorching Sahel desert seemed like a dream too distant to ever touch reality. He spoke firmly about building a 420 kilometers highway linking Ouagadougou to Dori and then extending it toward the borders of Niger and Mali, a region that has long been neglected by development and plagued by insecurity. The ceremony took place in front of a crowd of thousands, with farmers, soldiers, merchants, and students gathering under the sun to witness the declaration of an investment worth nearly $280 million US, a sum that could either break the nation's fragile budget or become the foundation of a brighter future. Traoré described the project as a path not only for vehicles but for the spirit of unity, insisting that connecting the capital with the remote north would bring education, healthcare, and economic opportunity to families who have been forgotten for generations. The early plans presented by his government outlined 3 phases. The first covering 150 kilometers funded directly by the state. The second expanding with international partners, and the final stage reaching the desert borders where commerce with neighboring nations could flourish. Engineers explained that the road would require advanced techniques to resist sand erosion, constant maintenance to prevent collapse, and an army of workers to keep it alive. Yet, they also noted that it could be a source of 25,000 direct and indirect jobs during its construction. Local traders imagined trucks carrying millet, livestock, and vegetables from the Sahel to the capital within hours instead of days. And teachers envisioned children being able to reach schools without risking dangerous journeys on unpaved paths. For the first time in years, villagers in the north felt their voices had been heard by the central government. And in their eyes, Ibrahim Traoré began to look less like a distant soldier president and more like a builder of national destiny. Still, the announcement stirred complex emotions because while rural families celebrated the idea of connection, intellectuals in Ouagadougou questioned whether the government had the capacity to manage such an ambitious project without sinking deeper into debt. Economic analysts warned that road projects in desert conditions often require double or triple the expected cost due to shifting sands and extreme climate, raising concerns that the promised $280 million could balloon into a financial trap. Meanwhile, opposition leaders asked why the president prioritized a highway over immediate issues like food shortages, electricity instability, and healthcare shortages, suggesting that this move was more about creating a symbolic legacy than solving urgent crisis. Yet, among the young people, particularly those unemployed and restless, the Desert Highway Project was seen as a chance to work, to earn, and to contribute to something historic. And many began signing up for labor brigades and construction programs with an enthusiasm rarely seen in Burkina Faso's recent history. Internationally, the announcement reached headlines across Africa, with African news reporting that Traoré's gamble might inspire other Sahel nations to launch similar projects, framing it as part of a broader trend of African leaders investing in infrastructure to fight isolation and poverty. Regional leaders in Mali and Niger expressed interest in eventually linking their road networks with the Burkina Faso highway, suggesting that it could transform the region into a corridor of trade rather than a battlefield of extremism. The symbolism of building a road in a land scarred by conflict was not lost on anyone, because for decades the Sahel has been defined by violence, displacement, and despair, and now a young president was declaring that a highway could become a shield against hopelessness. Journalists compared Traoré's announcement to the great infrastructure projects of past African leaders, noting that his words echoed the dreams of leaders like Thomas Sankara, who once believed that Africa's future depended on self-reliance and bold vision. Some critics argued that this was an unrealistic comparison. But for ordinary citizens standing under the hot sun that day, the announcement represented a turning point in national imagination. From that moment on, the Desert Highway project was no longer an idea whispered among politicians, but a living commitment, a promise that Burkina Faso would attempt the impossible and challenge the desert itself. As the crowd dispersed and the first surveyors began measuring the land, questions remained heavy in the air. Could Traoré secure enough partnerships without surrendering sovereignty? Could the workers withstand the grueling environment? And could the fragile nation carry such an ambitious weight on its shoulders? These questions would shape every step of the journey. But for that moment, hope was stronger than doubt, and the people of Burkina Faso dared to believe that a road across the desert might indeed be the path to their survival. As construction of the Desert Highway project began, the atmosphere in Burkina Faso shifted from cautious optimism to a sense of collective urgency, because the sight of bulldozers cutting where Russia continues to deepen its ties form to a promise that had once seemed only words. In the villages along the projected route, children gathered to watch engineers mark the land, while elders spoke of a future where they would no longer feel abandoned by the state. A rare moment of hope in a nation struggling with insecurity and poverty. The government framed the groundbreaking ceremony as a historic turning point, and Traoré himself declared that each meter of asphalt laid would be a victory against despair, an act of defiance against the forces of violence that had long held the Sahel hostage. That declaration created a powerful climax in the national narrative. Because for many citizens, the construction of the highway symbolized more than a road. It symbolized a fight for survival and sovereignty. The international community, however, reacted with mixed emotions. African News hailed it as the most daring infrastructure project in West Africa this decade, highlighting the courage of a young president taking on a monumental challenge. While French and American outlets warned of the enormous financial risks and the possibility that foreign powers might exploit the project for influence, Russia and China appeared quickly in the conversation, offering equipment and financial assistance, fueling suspicion that Traoré might be seeking alternatives to Western partnerships, a move that could reshape the geopolitical balance in the region. In Washington, analysts at policy think tanks debated whether the highway would stabilize the Sahel by boosting trade and mobility, or destabilize it further by stretching an already fragile budget, leaving Burkina Faso more vulnerable to extremist infiltration. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens expressed reactions that swung between pride and fear. Farmers in the north believed that access to markets could double their incomes. Yet they worried whether the road might also bring an influx of outsiders who could disrupt their way of life. Traders in Ouagadougou envisioned trucks filled with goods crossing the desert in record time. But critics in the capital accused the government of hiding the true costs, suggesting that the announced 280 million could climb toward 400 million before the first vehicles rolled across. The climax deepened when armed groups operating in the Sahel issued threats, declaring that they would not allow a government road to cut through their territories, raising alarms about the safety of workers and the possibility of sabotage. In response, Traoré ordered military units to secure the construction zones, turning the highway into both a civilian and military project, intertwining national defense with infrastructure in a way that captured the world's attention. International journalists reported images of young soldiers guarding bulldozers under a blazing sun, framing the project as a battle of wills between a nation striving for progress and insurgents determined to keep it in darkness within Burkina Faso. This confrontation created powerful emotions, stirring patriotic pride among many, but also deep anxiety because citizens knew that violent reprisals were possible and that lives could be lost to keep the dream alive. Yet, despite the danger, Young workers continued to enlist, saying they preferred to risk their lives building something meaningful than remain idle in unemployment and despair. That raw determination resonated across Africa, where leaders in Burkina Faso and Mali and Ghana watched closely, some expressing admiration and others skepticism, but all recognizing that this was not just about Burkina Faso. It was about the broader African struggle to conquer isolation and take control of development. The climax of the project's early phase came when the first 50 kilometers were completed and inaugurated, with villagers lining the road, some crying openly as they touched the fresh asphalt, calling it the Road of Hope. That emotional moment was widely broadcast, stirring debates across the continent and in Western capitals, where the question became sharper. Was this an inspiring story of resilience or a dangerous precedent of risky investments in fragile states? For the people on the ground, however, the road was not a debate, but a reality they could feel under their feet. And their reactions, joy, tears, prayers, songs, revealed that this project had already become a national symbol, one that might carry Traoré to historic heights or drag him into political peril. As the Desert Highway project advanced deeper into the barren lands, the consequences began to unfold in ways that touched nearly every household in Burkina Faso, revealing both the transformative potential of the road and the shadows of its risks. Families living in once isolated villages experienced the immediate impact when trucks began arriving with supplies that had previously been scarce, and mothers spoke emotionally about finally being able to reach hospitals within hours. Instead of enduring multi-day journeys on unsafe dirt paths, for many, the road became a lifeline, bringing lower food prices, easier access to schools, and new possibilities for local businesses that could finally trade beyond their dusty horizons. Yet, while civilians celebrated these changes, new challenges emerged as communities struggled with the sudden influx of outsiders, traders, and travelers, which disrupted traditional rhythms of life and sometimes caused tensions over resources and cultural identity. Politically, the highway quickly became a centerpiece of national debate. Supporters hailed President Ibrahim Traoré as a visionary builder who dared to confront geography and history, while critics accused him of prioritizing spectacle over substance and warned that the growing debt would weigh heavily on future generations. Opposition parties highlighted the rising maintenance costs, pointing out that desert roads demand constant repairs against shifting sands, and accused the government of underestimating expenses by hundreds of millions of dollars. Within the military, securing the road became a permanent mission as armed groups continued to threaten sabotage, which turned the project into both a source of pride and a dangerous front line. Soldiers patrolled the highway day and night, and while their presence reassured many civilians, it also reminded the nation that peace remained fragile and that development was inseparable from conflict in the Sahel. On the international stage, the project reshaped perceptions of Burkina Faso, elevating its visibility across Africa and beyond. Because a country once seen as peripheral now symbolized bold ambition and resilience, African Union leaders praised the highway as a contribution to the continental vision of integration, suggesting it could eventually connect to the broader African continental free trade area. While Western observers remained cautious, questioning whether such a fragile economy could sustain such an ambitious undertaking, civil society groups voiced concerns about environmental consequences, fearing that rapid construction without adequate safeguards could accelerate desertification rather than reverse it. Yet others argued that with proper planning, the highway could anchor reforestation projects and renewable energy zones. Economically, small businesses blossomed along the first sections of the road, with markets emerging where villagers sold food and crafts to passing travelers, creating pockets of prosperity in places once marked by silence and despair. Young men and women who had left to seek work in the capital began returning to their villages, drawn by new opportunities linked to transportation, tourism, and trade, a reversal of migration trends that had hollowed out rural communities. At the same time, however, corruption allegations surfaced as watchdog organizations questioned contracts awarded to certain companies, raising suspicions that political elites were enriching themselves while presenting the project as a gift to the people. These revelations intensified political divisions, with some seeing the highway as a unifying national achievement and others viewing it as a dangerous political gamble that could unravel if costs spiraled or scandals deepened. The most profound consequence, however, was psychological. For the first time in decades, citizens across Burkina Faso began speaking of their nation with renewed pride, telling each other that the desert no longer defined their fate, but that they, through collective sacrifice, could define the desert. That spirit of empowerment energized the youth, inspired songs and poems, and gave many the courage to believe in national progress despite insecurity and hardship. Yet beneath this rising pride remained a heavy uncertainty, because everyone understood that if the highway faltered, if corruption triumphed, or if insurgents succeeded in destroying sections of it, then the symbolic hope it carried could collapse into national disillusionment. In this fragile balance between triumph and tragedy, between prosperity and peril, the Desert Highway Project revealed itself as more than an infrastructure plan. It became the stage upon which Burkina Faso's social fabric, political stability, and future identity would be tested. From the perspective of the United States, the Desert Highway Project in Burkina Faso raised difficult questions about strategy, security, and influence. Because Washington has long viewed the Sahel as both a battleground against terrorism and a testing ground for global competition, analysts at American think tanks debated whether President Ibrahim Traoré's massive road investment represented an act of national courage or a reckless gamble that could open doors for Russia and China to expand their foothold in West Africa. Some voices within the State Department argued that improved infrastructure could stabilize the region by creating jobs, encouraging trade, and reducing the appeal of extremist groups, while others warned that heavy debts and foreign involvement might leave Burkina Faso vulnerable to manipulation. In Europe, officials in Brussels cautiously welcomed the project, but worried about transparency, financial sustainability, and the potential for corruption, noting that large infrastructure undertakings in fragile states often become symbols of hope that collapse under mismanagement. Meanwhile, Russia framed the highway as evidence that Africa was turning toward new partners, offering construction equipment and financial backing, while China highlighted its Belt and Road Initiative as a natural framework for collaboration. Both moves signaling a reshaping of global influence in the Sahel. African News covered the debate extensively, presenting the project not only as a national milestone, but as part of a continental struggle for sovereignty, asking whether African nations could build grand projects without falling into dependency traps. Across Africa, citizens in neighboring countries such as Niger and Mali expressed admiration and curiosity, seeing the Burkina Faso highway as a potential model for their own development. While leaders in Ghana and Sahel noted that regional connectivity could be a game changer if successful for ordinary Americans watching these developments, the issue feels distant, yet strangely familiar, because the story of a struggling nation risking everything on infrastructure resonates with the historical memory of projects like the Hoover Dam or the interstate highway system, symbols of national ambition during hard times. The crucial question remains, should the United States treat Traorré's gamble as a chance for partnership, or should it keep its distance and let other powers shape the future of the Sahel? The story of the Desert Highway Project leaves us with a haunting question. Because while the asphalt stretches boldly across Burkina Faso's unforgiving desert, the path ahead for the nation remains uncertain and fragile. President Ibrahim Traoré has promised that this $280 million highway will connect villages, empower farmers, and bring dignity to families who have long lived in isolation. Yet, every kilometer of road is also a reminder of the risks carried on his shoulders. For some, this project is the clearest sign that a young leader is willing to dream big, to challenge despair with vision, and to carve opportunity out of sand and stone, while for others it is a dangerous gamble that could drown the country in debt and deepen its political divisions. The world is watching closely from Washington to Moscow, from Brussels to Beijing, and every move Traoré makes will shape how Burkina Faso is remembered in the years to come, either as a symbol of bold resilience or as a cautionary tale of ambition undone by harsh realities. And for us watching from afar, the emotional question is whether this young president can truly keep his promise to turn a desert highway into a road toward hope, or whether the sands of time will swallow the dream before it reaches its destination. Do you think that President Ibrahim Traoré's national reform strategies are truly effective yet? Or should the people of Burkina Faso begin to look for someone else to lead them forward? Please share if you feel that you are one of the first to know about and support President Ibrahim Traoré. Subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines. And stay with us as we continue to follow Africa News, Burkina Faso, and the unfolding story of a leader who dares to challenge the desert itself.